Hello, and welcome to your small group meeting. I heard the other week that only 16% of self-identifying Christians in America belong to a small group. So whether you attend Waite Park Church or not, thank you for being involved in an important spiritual discipline that provides us with an opportunity to worship God, to study the Word, and build deep, meaningful spiritual friendships. 2 weeks ago, we talked about life over God and what it looks like to live apart from God. Last week, we discussed the posture of life under God, which is sometimes a response to those who live life over God. We talked about how oftentimes religious people have a tendency to view themselves as servants and they view God as master. Well, this week we want to take a look at the life from God posture. Even in the parable of the prodigal son that we read last week, the father ends up saying to the older brother, "My son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours." Oftentimes as Christians, especially those of us living in a consumeristic society in America, struggle with the temptation to live a life from God posture. While it's true that everything comes from God, it's equally true that everything belongs to God, including your life. As Christians, that's doubly true. Not only were you created by God, but you were also redeemed by God. You were bought with a price, as Paul says. In another place, Paul tells us to offer our bodies as living sacrifices in worship to God. I can remember clearly being in high school and going to a Young Life camp. And we went with a group of friends, and while we were there was this boy named Chris. And Chris said, "I think it's great that Jesus died for me, but I don't see why I need to live differently. Actually, I know that God forgives me and loves me, so there's no reason for me to live differently." Chris lived a life from God mentality. During my short time here at Waite Park Church, I've had conversations with people from the neighborhood that explicitly articulated a life from God posture. One only prayed when he needed something. That was the extent of his religious life. The other only went to church when life was going good, because he felt like then he owed God. But when life wasn't going his way, he'd stop going to church. You see, a life from God posture often takes a view of God as a divine butler or a genie in a bottle. Or sometimes I've heard it referred to as the Santa Claus God. He wants us to be happy and he helps us in our pursuit of what we think will make us happy. But otherwise, he doesn't really care and he's not really involved in our lives. The life from God posture is rampant in our society today. Chances are you have a close family member or friend that fits this description to the T. During our sermon last week, we looked at Acts 8, verses 9 to 25, and specifically at Simon the sorcerer, and the choices he made and the values that undergirded those choices. Simon lived a life from God posture, and as a result, Simon thought he was able to predict God and control him for his own purposes. Simon lived as if he was the center of the universe. Simon saw God as a means to an end instead of recognizing that God is the ultimate end in himself. Simon's life was unchanged even when he encountered God and the apostles. Ultimately, we said, Simon aimed too low. Life from God settles for less, leaves us wanting more, leaves us feeling unsatisfied, and doesn't lead to the good life. So the question is, do we believe that life is good when we desire what God desires? And if so, are we willing to do what it takes to make that happen?